Cowboy accepted an Apache slave as payment, only to discover she was the chief's daughter. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Wade Carrick had spent the last 12 years keeping to himself on a patch of dry land outside Broken Mesa. He had worked as a trail scout for army convoys and cattle outfits until a raid on a caravan ended with his younger brother shot through the ribs while Wade was too far ahead to help. After burying him, he stopped taking contracts, built a cabin with leftover lumber and scrap nails, and worked just enough cattle to stay alive. His only goal now was to avoid other people and the trouble they dragged behind them. No wife, no family, no crew, just the land, 2 horses, and a rifle he rarely used unless a coyote came too close to the chicken pen. That evening, he had just filled a tin pail with water pulled from the well and was scraping mud off his boots when he heard horses coming from the south trail. Hooves on hard dirt carried differently depending on how fast men rode, and these weren't moving with focus or discipline. The rhythm was unsteady, drunk, tired, or both. He stopped what he was doing and watched the tree line. He considered going inside for the rifle, but knew stepping out with a gun in hand would only stir something up. 3 riders emerged through the dust, clothes stained with sweat and trail dirt, faces unshaven. One wore a cavalry coat with no insignia, another had a scar over his eyebrow, and the third smelled like whiskey even from a distance. Their horses were breathing hard, flecked with foam. Wade stayed near the fence, his expression flat. He didn't greet them, didn't ask questions. People who arrived uninvited usually brought excuses or demands. The one in front raised a hand like they were neighbors. "Evening, we come for trade," he said. His voice was rough, like it had been strained from shouting earlier. Wade didn't answer. His silence made the man keep talking. "That bay mare of yours, we were told she'd be ours for the work last spring. We're here to collect." His eyes were bloodshot, and his words had a slur that didn't come from fatigue alone. Wade's jaw moved once. "I don't owe you a thing," he said, voice steady, not raised. The man jerked his chin toward the rider in the back. "Got payment with us." That was when Wade noticed the rope trailing from the saddle horn. A woman walked behind the horse, wrist bound in front, rope tight enough to leave angry red grooves. Her ankles were scraped. She was barefoot. Every step she took was shaky, like her legs were giving out, but she forced them straight again. Long black hair was stuck to the side of her face with dirt and sweat. The deerskin dress she wore had been ripped down the side and across the chest, exposing the top line of one breast and bruises on her collarbone. They stopped a few yards from the fence. The rider yanked the rope forward, and she stumbled, but didn't cry out. Her head stayed down, her breathing uneven and shallow. The lead man grinned. "Caught her stealing near the canyon. Army don't want her, we're leaving her here. You get the horse, we get the mare, and nobody argues." Wade looked at the woman, then at the men. His face didn't change, but his stomach tightened. He knew what they wanted, an easy trade, no questions. He also knew what would happen if he refused. 3 half-sober men with guns, short tempers, and nothing to lose could destroy more than they gained. "I don't trade people," he said. "You ain't trading. You're receiving. Take the horse. She stays here till someone comes for her." The man's tone made it clear they wouldn't wait for agreement. Wade didn't like giving ground, but he measured the risk. He had no backup, no neighbors nearby, and a gunfight in the open would be loud and pointless. Without showing emotion, he nodded once toward the corral. "Take the mare and ride." They didn't thank him. 2 men dismounted and untied the horse he pointed out. The third tied the woman to the fence post like luggage being dropped off. She braced her feet and took the impact without falling. When they mounted up again, one of them chuckled. "If she dies here, you can bury her or leave her for the wolves. Your problem now." They rode off, dragging dust behind them. When the riders disappeared, Wade stayed still for almost a full minute. He could hear the faint rasp of the woman's breath, the wind pushing dry brush, and the creak of the fence rope. He didn't go near her. He walked back toward the cabin as if nothing had changed. Inside, he took off his hat and sat on a chair. He poured himself water and drank half. He told himself she was not his responsibility. Fort Haven riders crossed this land twice a week. They'd see her and take her, or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't on him. As darkness set, he lit a lamp and sliced a strip of salted pork. He ate slowly, thinking about the last time he ignored something that didn't belong to him. That memory always ended in a grave and a man with his blood on Wade's hands. He glanced through the doorway again. She was still upright, but her shoulders slumped. The night air was cooling, and she had no shoes, no fire, nothing but rope holding her up. She hadn't made a sound. An hour passed. Coyotes began to call. He tried to lie down, but didn't. He sat up on the edge of the bed and felt a sour pull in his chest. Annoyance or guilt, he wasn't sure. He cursed once under his breath and stood. Outside, the wind was cooler. He walked to her without speaking. She didn't notice him until he touched the rope. She tensed but didn't fight. Her skin was hot with fever when his hand brushed her arm. He saw the cracked heels of her feet, the shaking in her legs. The rope burns hardened with dried blood. He cut the rope with his knife. Her arms dropped forward and she swayed. He grabbed her before she hit the ground. She weighed less than he expected, all tension and bone covered in sweat and dirt. She didn't try to talk, didn't ask questions. Her eyes were half open but unfocused. "I'm not keeping you," he said quietly, more to force the decision into something temporary. He picked her up and carried her inside. Her head rested against his chest, hair sticking to his shirt. The torn dress slipped, but he didn't look. He laid her on the spare cot his brother once used and pulled a blanket over her. Under the lamplight, he saw the bruises on her ribs and shoulder, the cut on her thigh, the swelling on her wrists. She breathed the way people do when the body is trying to shut down and keep going at the same time. He fetched a tin cup of water and set it near the bed. He thought about asking her name, but she was already unconscious. Wade sat down in the chair again, staring at the floor. He told himself she'd leave as soon as she could walk. He wouldn't get involved, wouldn't ask who she was, wouldn't let this become another burden that cost more than it gave. But he didn't lie down. He stayed awake and listened to make sure she was still breathing. The night stayed quiet except for the wind against the wood and the sound of someone he didn't plan to save, trying not to die in his bed. Wade woke before the sun, same as every morning. But the sense of quiet in the cabin wasn't the same kind he was used to. For a second, he forgot she was there. Then he heard the shallow rasp of breathing from the cot and remembered he'd carried an unconscious Apache woman into his home after dark. He sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbed the back of his neck, and listened. She hadn't moved much. The blanket still covered her shoulders, and one arm lay outside it, bruised and swollen at the wrist where the rope had cut in. He stood and crossed the room. There were questions turning in his mind that he didn't speak out loud. Where had those men taken her from? Was there someone searching for her? Had the army already marked her as property or prisoner? If he rode into town and someone recognized her, they'd assume he stole her or bought her, and neither accusation would end clean. Up close, he saw dirt caked in her hairline and dry blood on her leg, where the dress had split above the thigh. He checked the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was filthy. Her feet were cracked and swollen, the soles dark with bruising and torn skin. No one walked in that condition for long unless they were forced. He stepped back and fetched the old wash basin from the corner, filled it with water from the pail, and set it near the cot. She didn't open her eyes, but her breathing hitched when the cold cloth touched her forehead. He cleaned the dirt from her face and wiped her hands, careful not to press too hard where rope burns still glistened raw. She stirred once, her lips parting. She tried to speak, but no words formed. He gave her a sip of water, holding the cup steady at her mouth. Most of it rolled down her chin, but she swallowed enough to keep from choking. He didn't try to talk to her, didn't ask if she could understand him. He focused on the practical things first. There was a cabinet by the door where he kept dry bread, coffee, and jerky. He sliced a piece of bread into small chunks and put them in a tin bowl in case she woke hungry. He had stitched his own cuts dozens of times and patched men on the trail after ambushes, so tending her wounds didn't feel strange, only inconvenient. While she rested, he stepped outside to tend the animals. The bay mare those men took had been one of his better horses, and the trade stung more now that the sun had risen and the loss felt real. The chicken pen was quiet, and a thin layer of dust coated the water trough again. He checked the horizon out of habit. No riders in sight, no army patrol, no wagon tracks. The land was still, but stillness never lasted long. When he returned inside, She was half awake, eyes barely open. She looked at the ceiling first, then shifted her gaze toward him. Her face didn't show panic, only exhaustion and caution, the kind animals had after being hunted too long. Her throat moved like she wanted to speak. He crouched beside the cot. "You can drink if you're able," he said, voice low and even. She blinked, understanding the intent, even if not the words. She raised one hand weakly, trying to pull the blanket up over her chest. The torn dress still sagged at the neckline, exposing the bruised skin near her collarbone and the top curve of one breast. She avoided his eyes when she covered it. He stood and brought the bowl of bread, setting it on the floor beside her. "You eat when you can, then you leave when you're able to walk." He spoke like he was stating a contract with himself as much as with her. She looked at him then, dark eyes steady, not pleading. She tried to speak again, her voice barely a breath. "No go," she said slowly, the words rough but clear enough. She wasn't asking permission, she was stating refusal. He didn't answer. He wasn't ready to argue with someone who couldn't stand upright yet. Instead, he reached for an old shirt from a trunk. It was one of his lighter ones, still worn-looking but clean. He set it at the foot of the cot. "Dress is torn. Use that when you can stand." Her gaze followed his hand, but she said nothing. She closed her eyes again for a moment, as if the act of looking cost too much strength. There was a question hanging in the air. Her name, who she was, why those men had her. But he didn't ask yet, not because he didn't want to know, but because knowing would make her presence his problem, and he'd spent years making sure he had none. An hour passed before she tried to sit up. He watched from the table, arms crossed, ready to help if she fell, but not rushing to do it. She managed to brace herself on one elbow and pull the blanket around her. The movement made her flinch where the rope burn stretched. She looked at the tin bowl, then at him, deciding whether it was safe to eat food from his hand. Hunger won out. She reached slowly, fingers trembling, and brought a piece of bread to her mouth. He saw how carefully she chewed, like swallowing too much might make her sick. When she finished the second piece, her voice came again, quiet and struggling through limited English. "Name?" He hadn't expected her to ask first. He hesitated, not out of fear, but because names made things real. "Wade," he said finally. She nodded once. He waited, thinking she might offer hers. When she didn't, he forced himself to ask, "What do I call you?" She looked at the floor, then at the wall, avoiding his eyes while answering. "Ayana." The name landed differently than he expected, less like a stranger passing through, and more like someone whose absence might be noticed elsewhere. That made his next thought heavier. If someone was looking for her, coming here could bring them straight to his door. He said nothing about it. Not yet. She finished the last piece of bread and leaned back slowly, eyelids low but not fully closed. The fever had dropped slightly, but she was still weak. He took the empty bowl and stood near the door for a moment. "You rest now," he said. "When you can walk, you go." She didn't nod, didn't argue. She looked at him with the same unreadable expression she'd had when he cut the rope. Neither trust nor fear, just quiet endurance. He stepped outside again, telling himself this was temporary, that she was not staying, that he would not let another life tie itself to his. But even as the sun climbed higher and the heat returned to the yard, he kept listening for any sound from the cot. And every time he checked the horizon, he wasn't sure if he was hoping to see riders or praying not to. Through the late morning, the cabin stayed quiet except for the low creak of wood when wind pushed along the walls. Wade split firewood near the shed, listening without meaning to. He told himself he was only making sure she didn't pass out or choke. But the truth was harder to ignore now that he'd spoken her name once in his mind. Ayana. He'd seen Apache women before in passing, traded with some, fought against others, but never had one lying in his bed or asking his name. When he stepped back inside, she was awake again, sitting upright with the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Dirt streaked her arms and legs, and her hair hung down in a heavy tangle. She had pulled his shirt into her lap, but hadn't put it on yet. She seemed to be studying the cabin piece by piece. The stove with its blackened pipe, the narrow table, the single shelf with 2 tin plates and a coffee pot. Her eyes didn't move fast. They swept each thing once, like she was remembering it. He filled a cup from the basin and handed it to her without touching her skin. She took it, fingers unsteady but stronger than before, and drank slowly. He watched the way she handled the water, controlled, careful, like someone who had learned not to consume too fast or waste anything. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Why you take me inside?" He didn't answer right away. The question was direct, not wounded, her voice rough but steady. He leaned his shoulder against the wall and crossed his arms. "You would have died out there if I didn't." It was the simplest version of the truth. The rest, that he didn't want another memory turning into a grave, he kept to himself. Ayana lowered the cup. "Men say you take me as trade." "I didn't ask for you," he said flatly. "Didn't want to fight over a damn horse." He didn't care if the wording was blunt. Honesty was the only thing he had left some days. She nodded once, absorbing that without visible reaction. Then she pointed to her wrists, the skin torn and swollen. "They take me 3 days. No food, no speak my name." Her English was broken, but her meaning was clear. He crouched beside the cot and looked at the rope burns. Infection was a risk. He got the salve he kept for injuries, thick and herbal smelling, and set it beside her. "For the wrist," he said. She didn't reach for it. She waited until he stepped back, then uncapped the tin and began to apply it herself slowly, wincing when the raw skin stung. He stayed close enough to intervene but didn't move to help unless she dropped something. When she finished, he placed a strip of cloth on the edge of the bed. "Wrap them. Keep them clean." She tied each wrist with the fabric, teeth gripping the ends when her fingers shook too much. When she finished, she picked up the shirt he had given her. "You turn," she said quietly, motioning with her chin. He didn't argue. He turned his back and stared at the window while she pulled the torn dress down from one shoulder and dragged the shirt over her head. He heard the fabric catch on her hair and her quiet breath as she tugged it into place. When she said finished, he faced her again. His shirt hung past her thighs, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She kept the blanket over her legs. The dress lay bunched on the floor, blood and dirt thick in the seams. He wondered how long she'd been wearing it, how many times she'd been dragged or knocked down before it tore. He brought a small plate with jerky and half an apple he'd been saving. She ate the jerky first in small bites, chewing each one slowly, then hesitated over the apple before taking it. As she bit into it, her shoulders loosened slightly, like the taste of something clean stirred a memory. He finally asked the question that had been circling him since the night before. "You got people looking for you?" For the first time since he'd seen her conscious, she looked directly at him. Her eyes didn't flicker or shift. Maybe dead." She paused, searching for the right English. "Raid, soldiers, I hide in rocks. Men take me when I walk for water." Her tone didn't shake. She spoke like someone remembering weather, not pain. He absorbed the details without showing frustration, though they complicated things more than he wanted. If soldiers had attacked her band and bounty riders had taken her, someone might be tracking either group. He looked toward the door instinctively, sizing the distance to his rifle. "You stay until you can stand and ride," he said. "Then you go wherever you're going." She set the apple core on the plate and looked around again. "I go with no shoes, no horse." She wasn't pleading, she was observing fact. Her feet were still cracked and swollen. Even if he forced her off his land, she wouldn't get far. He didn't respond, not because he didn't hear her, but because saying anything would make a decision he wasn't ready to make. Midday, heat thickened through the cabin. He moved the basin to the table and cleaned his hands. She lay back down slowly, the energy she'd used burning quick. The fever hadn't returned fully, but she was still weak. He covered her legs with the blanket again. Before he stepped back outside, she spoke once more. "You leave me when I can walk." "Yeah," he said. She didn't look relieved or angry. She just nodded and closed her eyes, like someone accepting a sentence they already guessed would come. He stood there a moment longer, then went to check the shed and the fence line. He didn't see tracks near the ridge, no smoke signals, no glint of metal, no riders cutting across the flats. Still, his gut stayed tense. By late afternoon, he mended a broken hinge on the chicken pen and checked the water barrel twice. He kept glancing at the horizon and at the cabin door, telling himself he was just being cautious. But the question had already settled into the back of his mind. If someone did come looking for her, tribe, army, or bounty scum, would he hand her over? Or would he fight to keep something he never intended to take? By the time the sun slipped toward late afternoon, Wade had gone through most of the chores he normally stretched across the day. Work usually gave him something to push thoughts aside with, but now every task left room for distraction. He checked the corral fence twice, even though he knew no other horses were left in it. He poured feed for the chickens, though they were still pecking at scraps from the morning. He sharpened a hatchet that wasn't dull. Each step brought him near the cabin door again, and each time he stopped himself from going in too soon. When he finally opened the door, she was sitting up again, legs covered by the blanket, his shirt hanging loose around her. She had tried to braid part of her hair, but it was tangled and stuck to dried blood in places. There was a pile of dirt she'd scraped from under her nails onto the floorboard near the cot. She looked alert, weak, but no longer at the edge of collapse. He set down a tin cup of water and a piece of cooked beans and salt pork he'd reheated. She didn't reach for it right away. Her eyes drifted to the open door behind him, then back to the cup. "Men come back?" she asked. "Not those men," he said. "They got what they wanted." She absorbed that, then lifted the cup with both hands. Her wrists still trembled despite being wrapped. She drank slowly, then nodded once at the plate. That was the closest she came to asking permission to eat. He pulled a chair near the table and sat, watching without staring. Her chest rose slowly as she chewed. He could see bruises at the base of her throat where someone had likely shoved or grabbed her. The shirt collar hid some of it, but the marks were fresh. There were questions she hadn't answered yet. How many men were involved, whether anyone else had been taken, how far from here she'd been captured. But he didn't push. Instead, he asked something simpler. "How far was your band from the canyon when the raid happened?" She hesitated, not because she didn't understand, but because she was deciding whether to answer. "2 days' walk north of Water Pass," she said. "Soldiers come late. Fire. Many run." He nodded once. He knew the area she meant. Rough ridges, dead juniper, a dry stream bed that sometimes held pools after storms. If soldiers had attacked there might be bodies scattered or prisoners taken. News of that kind made its way to town slowly, twisted by rumor. Broken Mesa rarely heard the truth first. He didn't ask the next question out loud, if she had a husband, children, or family among those who scattered. But something in her face made him guess she'd lost more than her freedom in the past week. She set the empty plate aside and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her breathing steadied. After a few seconds of silence, she spoke again. "You live here alone a long time." 12 years, he said, since the raids up near Salt Creek took half the trail crew I worked with. He didn't mention his brother. He almost never did. She studied him like she weighed that answer. Then she looked at the door again. "You fight if they come, or you send me out." He didn't move in his chair, but his eyes fixed on hers. The question wasn't angry, it was direct. The same way a person might ask if a roof leaks or a horse bites. "Depends who rides in," he said truthfully. She nodded once, not disappointed, not relieved. She understood more than she spoke. The silence after her words brought up something else he'd avoided. What if her people survived and came looking for her? He knew some Apache bands tracked well and traveled quietly. If any scouts were searching, they might already be following the riders who took her. His cabin wasn't far off a route used by hunters and raiding parties in dry years. He checked the window out of habit. She noticed. "If my people find, they kill you," she said with her own malice. "They think you take me for use or trade." He didn't flinch. "Then you tell them different." She looked down at her wrapped wrists. They not always listen to woman first. The truth of that hung heavy in the air. He'd seen it before. The way some tribal men treated captured women and how suspicion could cut deeper than fact. He stood and took the empty dishes to the basin. "You're not a slave here," he said. "If anyone rides in, they'll hear that from me first." She watched him, trying to read whether he meant it or just wanted peace until she could walk. "Why?" she asked. He dried the bowl with an old cloth. "Because I don't want another grave near this cabin," he said. He didn't add details, he didn't know her history, but part of it had slipped through anyway. She didn't respond, but her gaze shifted from caution to something quieter. Not trust, but not complete distance either. As the light faded, he fetched his spare boots and set them at the foot of the cot. Won't fit perfect, but better than walking barefoot. She touched the worn leather and nodded once. When I strong, I go, she said, reminding him of the plan he'd set. He should have agreed and left it at that. Instead, he found himself saying, you don't go far alone, not with soldiers and riders still circling the valleys. Her brow tightened slightly. You send me to town? No, he said immediately. Town was the worst place. Questions, stares, unwanted hands. He realized she thought he might hand her over or trade her back. He added, you stay until you decide where to head. I won't force you out. She took that in without visible relief, but without resistance. Before she closed her eyes, she asked one more thing. If my people come first, you speak before they kill. He met her eyes. I don't run from a door I open, he said. She blinked once, then rested her head against the cot. For the first time since she arrived, she fell asleep without collapsing into it. Wade sat at the table until the lamplight burned low, turning over what he'd just promised. He didn't know her story fully, didn't know who might be hunting for her or what blood oath trailed behind her name. All he knew was that the second he cut that rope, her problems crossed into his land. And now he'd have to decide which ones he'd meet with words and which with a rifle. Morning came without noise. Wade woke to the faint sound of movement near the cot. Ayanna was sitting upright again, one hand pressed against her side as if a bruise there had stiffened overnight. The blanket had slipped down to her waist, and his shirt, though loose, clung to her shoulders with dried sweat. She noticed him watching and pulled the blanket back up, not out of embarrassment but habit. Covering herself had become a reflex after being hauled and displayed like property. He didn't speak at first. He moved to the stove, stoked the coals, and poured water into a coffee pot. She shifted her legs over the side of the cot and eased her feet to the floor. The cuts across her soles had scabbed overnight, though cracks still showed. She reached for the boots he'd left and tested them without standing. They were too big and stiff, but she didn't complain. He watched her attempt to stand, steadying herself with one hand on the cot frame. She swayed but didn't fall. That alone told him the fever had broken enough for her to move without collapsing. You need to clean the cuts before you walk anywhere, he said. She glanced at the basin on the table, then at her legs. The silence that followed held an unspoken question. Would he help, or would he leave her to do it alone? Wade filled the basin with warm water and set it at the foot of the bed. Sit, he said simply. She lowered herself, muscles tense, expression unreadable but alert. He crouched and lifted one foot into the water. She stiffened. He didn't grip her ankle more than necessary, and after a beat, she didn't pull away. He washed the dried blood and dirt from the cuts in silence. When she flinched, he slowed but didn't stop. This wasn't charity to him. It was practical. Infection out here killed faster than bullets sometimes. When he finished with both feet, he wrapped them with strips of cloth and tied them tight. She stayed quiet during the entire process, only speaking when he pulled the basin away. You fixed men before. Her tone carried no disbelief, more curiosity. He wiped his hands on the towel. I patched trail crews when fights or raids hit us. Didn't always work. His voice hardened slightly at the memory, but he didn't linger in it. She stared at him for a moment, then asked something that caught him off guard. Your brother die there? He didn't know how she guessed, but something in his eyes must have given it away earlier. Wade didn't answer for several seconds. He finally said, yes, Salt Creek Ridge. Wrong place, wrong hour. That was all he could push out. She processed the answer without apology or pity, just a small nod like she filed it away. He stood and moved to the table. You can sit outside if you want air, but stay close to the cabin. If riders spot you out in the open, they'll assume you're alone or taken again. She didn't argue. She pulled herself up, wrapped the blanket around her waist like a skirt, and stepped slowly toward the door. She walked with a limp, testing each step, the bandages cushioning enough to bear weight. He followed a few paces behind in case she dropped, but she made it onto the small porch without asking for a hand. Outside, the sun was pale and not yet hot. The The soil was dry, but not cracked in the shade. She lowered herself to sit on the edge of the porch, blanket still over her legs. Her hair moved slightly in a breeze, and he noticed for the first time how long it actually was, down past her ribs, thick and tangled. She scanned the horizon with trained eyes, not just curiosity. "No smoke," she said. "No riders either," he replied. He checked the ridge again anyway. She looked at the corral, the shed, the stacked wood, the fenced patch of earth where he used to grow beans before drought ruined the last planting. "You live far from others," she said, "on purpose." He nodded. She seemed to expect that. After a long pause, she spoke again. "I not go back to town. If soldiers see, they take me or kill me. If riders see, they sell." He crossed his arms and leaned against the porch post. "I didn't plan to send you to town." She absorbed that without comment. He could feel another question building by the way she looked past him. He waited. "You give me horse when I leave?" she asked, voice steady. "I've got one left, that's sound, but I don't turn a horse loose with someone who can't ride yet or without knowing where they're going." She looked down at her hands, then lifted her chin. "I not run. I find my people, if any still live, or I follow trail of men who take me." Wade didn't show it, but something in that answer made his jaw tighten. "You know their faces?" She nodded once, eyes darkening. "3, I remember them." It told him something he hadn't been sure of. She didn't just want to get away. She might come back in pieces if she tried to track them on foot. He wasn't about to say that. He stepped off the porch and walked to the well. While he drew water, she called quietly from behind him. "Why those men know your name?" He paused, rope in hand. He hadn't thought about that when he first saw them. He returned to her slowly. "You heard them say it." She narrowed her eyes. "One say Carrick Land. They know this place." Wade set the bucket down. "I've done work with some of their kind before. Driven cattle, carried messages, fought off bandits. They hear names, they spread it when it suits them." She considered that. "They come back. They got what they came for. But if they talk in town and someone learns you're here, trouble could follow." She didn't look frightened. She looked calculating. "Then I must stand before I go. If they come, I not hide under blanket." He didn't argue. He just said, "You won't be alone if someone shows up here." She watched him a few seconds longer, reading what he didn't say. "You speak truth now," she said, not as a compliment, but as a statement that she recognized the difference between empty promises and real intent. Inside, he cleared the dishes and set a spare blanket near the stove. She returned to the cot after an hour outside, feet sore and body tired. Before she lay down, she did something neither of them had addressed directly. She dragged the cot so its head was closer to the wall and not facing the door. It was the act of someone who had been taken while sleeping once before. He pretended not to notice, but he understood it. While she rested, he rechecked his rifle, ensured the chamber was clean, and set it within reach but not visible from the door. By nightfall, the land was still quiet, but now there were more reasons than silence to keep watch. By the next morning, Ayana was able to stand without holding the cot frame. She moved slowly, testing her balance, and the bandages, though wrapped, held tight enough for her feet not to split open again. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't hover. The silence between them had settled into something that wasn't hostile or uneasy, just direct. While he cooked cornmeal and reheated beans, she used a comb he'd left on the table to work through her hair. The strands were knotted and streaked with dried blood, but she pulled through them with patience, wincing only when a tangle caught too hard. She tied part of it at the back with a strip of cloth from the ruined dress, the rest falling over her shoulders. The shirt he'd given her hung loose but stayed closed. When he handed her a tin plate with food, she didn't thank him verbally, but didn't hesitate to take it. She ate each bite clean, not leaving scraps. After swallowing the last spoon of beans, she wiped her mouth with her wrist and set the plate down gently. There were still questions Wade hadn't voiced, whether anyone from her band had escaped capture, whether the army would circle back near Salt Creek, whether the men who traded her might brag about what they'd done. He weighed these thoughts while pouring himself coffee. Ayana spoke first. "You know name of men who take me." Wade leaned against the counter and thought back. He had seen their faces clearly. One with the scar across the eyebrow, one wearing a cavalry coat, one with the whiskey breath who led the rope. The one who talked most is named Strick McCall, he said. He's worked gun for hire, cattle stealing, freight escort. The others I've seen near town but don't carry names I trust. She listened without blinking. They say where they go? No, Wade said, but they were short on feed and carrying no packs. They'd stop in Broken Mesa or the trading post south of the ridge. They want to sell that horse if they haven't already. The mention of Broken Mesa made her expression harden slightly. Town men buy a woman like meat. Wade didn't deny it. He'd seen worse than deals on horses. She asked something unexpected. If I speak their names, you tell me if I say it right. He understood. She wanted the words clear in English, so there'd be no mistaking who she meant to hunt. He nodded once. Say what you remember. She spoke slowly, piecing together sounds. McCall, Henson, Rig or Rick. One call, other Sloan or Stone. She paused, then added, they speak about man with blue coat at Army Fort. That struck something he'd pushed aside. If they were dealing with someone at Fort Haven, then any harm done to her might be tied to more than drunken scum. He studied her face. You sure they said that? She nodded once. They talked like they trained me before, then trade me again. That detail closed one of the silent questions he'd been turning over. She wasn't taken during the raid and sold off immediately. They'd been moving her around, likely to find a buyer. If a soldier was involved, handing her off could trigger more trouble than a simple rescue. After she finished speaking, he took the plates to wash them. Ayanna stood and walked slowly to the doorway. She braced a hand on the frame and stepped outside. She stood on the porch and looked out at the flats. The air was clearer than the day before. No dust trails, no riders crossing the ridge. She scanned the horizon like someone trained to read the land, eyes narrowing where the trail bent out of sight. Wade joined her after a minute. He brought a piece of jerky and a water pouch, offering them without saying why. She took both. I track men when feet strong, she said, but not walk far alone yet. He nodded. He knew the look in her eyes, someone storing strength for a purpose. The questions circling both their minds finally surfaced. If your people come before soldiers, Wade said, you want them to take you or wait and see? She didn't look at him when she answered. If my father lives, he find me. If he dead, my uncle or cousin, come. They see you and think you use me. He didn't flinch. Then I stand with you when they come. She turned her head slightly at that. Not surprised, not grateful, just measuring if he meant it. Why you do that? He didn't sugarcoat it. Because you're under my roof and because those men didn't leave you here by your choosing. She looked away again, but something in her shoulders eased. Not trust, but acceptance. A silence passed before another unspoken question found voice. If Army comes first, she asked. I'll tell them I found you tied and near dead, he said. If they want to drag you off, they'll have to get past me first. She processed that, understanding exactly what he meant. He wasn't offering to die for her, but he wasn't handing her over either. They stayed outside until the sun rose higher, warming the dry ground. She practiced stepping off the porch and back up again, testing her legs. The bandages were already dusted but held. Wade went to the shed to fetch a smaller water barrel. While he worked, Ayanna spoke without raising her voice. You think men come back for a horse or for me? Not for you, he said. They didn't know your name, didn't know who you were to anyone, but if they brag in town, someone else might follow. That answer quieted one more question. Before going back inside, she asked the one thing he had been waiting to hear. When I strong, if I stay longer, you make me leave or let me decide? He looked at her directly. You walk out when you're ready. No one forces you here or away. She held his eyes for a moment longer, then nodded once and stepped inside. By nightfall, neither of them had said it aloud, but the truth had settled in. Whatever came next, tribes, soldiers, or the men who brought her, neither of them would face it like strangers. By the next day, the air held a dry stillness that usually meant heat would rise fast. Wade stepped out early to check the fence lines, but his focus kept drifting back toward the cabin. Ayanna had slept through most of the night without fever, and the way she moved in the morning showed she'd gotten some strength back, though pain still followed each step. When he came back inside, she was sitting at the table instead of the cot, his shirt tied at the waist with a strip from her old dress. She had washed part of her hair using the basin and braided it in two thick sections that fell over her chest. The boots he'd given her were on her feet now, laced as tight as she could manage. The bandages still showed at her ankles. She looked at him, then at the rifle leaning by the door. "Today you stay or ride?" she asked. "Stay," he said. "Too much risk leaving this place empty." She nodded slowly. "I walk little, not far. Outside only." He didn't stop her. He watched how carefully she put weight on each foot before stepping. She walked to the porch and stood at the edge, breathing in the morning air. The sun hadn't burned the ground yet, but the light was sharp. He brought 2 tin cups and set one near her. She took a drink and stayed silent until she'd swallowed. Then she said, "You think Army riders pass here again soon?" "Maybe tomorrow. Could be 3 days. They don't move regular unless there's a chase," he answered. Ayana's eyes moved across the horizon. "If they come and see me, they ask questions. If they see I wear your shirt, they ask more." Wade leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "Then you stay inside till they pass. They don't search homes unless called to." She considered that. Then with no warning, she asked what she hadn't yet. "You tell someone in town I am here?" "No," he said. "I don't speak to town unless I have to. Last time was near spring." She accepted his answer without suspicion. But another question followed. "If men who took me come back, what you do? Let them take me again? Or fight?" He didn't look away when he answered. "I don't let anyone drag someone off my land tied like an animal. If they come back, they won't walk off easy." She heard the finality in his tone, didn't question it further. They stayed outside for a while. She walked from the porch to the water trough and back again several times, testing distance. He fetched a clean cloth and handed it over without words when sweat started to gather at her temples. She wiped her face and gave it back. After a while, she sat on the edge of the porch steps and asked something that had been missing until now. "You say your name, Wade, but who else know you here? No wife, no kin." He hesitated, then gave the truth in pieces. "My brother used to ride with me. He's buried east of here under a mesquite marker. No wife, no children, no one else comes through." She looked in the grave's direction, though she couldn't see it. "You speak to him still?" He gave a dry breath that wasn't quite a laugh, not in words. She didn't press further. She looked down at her bandaged wrists. After a silence that stretched, she said, "Men who took me think I am nothing. They call me slave, say I have no people left. But they wrong." Wade listened. Her voice had no tremor, only certainty. "My father is Tania," she continued, "chief of Blackwood Band. If he lives, he send trackers. If he dead, his blood still making them come." That answered the unspoken question about why Apache riders might appear without warning. Wade absorbed it without outward shock. He only asked, "You sure he still lives?" She nodded once. "I not see his body, I not hear his death breath. Until that, he lives." Wade respected how firmly she said it. His own brother had died in his arms. No uncertainty there. She added, "If my people come and see me here with no rope, no chain, they listen. If they see sign I am used—" She didn't finish, but he knew what she meant. If they thought he had taken her like property, bloodshed would follow first, questions after. He answered in a low voice, "No one here touches you or claims you. If they ride in, I'll be the one speaking. They can listen or try to kill, but they'll know you weren't kept wrong." Her eyes held his longer than before, not soft, steady. Afternoon heat pressed in by then. She went back inside to rest her feet and rewrap the bandages. Wade fetched fresh water from the well and brought it in. She washed her hands and face properly, this time without him needing to tell her. He checked the rifle again, then shut the door part way to keep dust out. While she rested, he sat at the table and sharpened his knife. The scrape of steel filled the quiet. Before she fell asleep, she said something low but clear. "If my people come, you not run." He set the knife down. "No, I won't run." She seemed to measure the weight of that answer. Then she lay back, one arm across her stomach, eyes closing without fear. By sundown, neither of them spoke again, but both knew something that hadn't been said yet. Whatever came next wouldn't be met with distance between them. Whether it was her people, the army, or the men who sold her, no part of this was separate anymore. The wind shifted before dawn, carrying a faint trace of horses that didn't belong to Wade. He woke instantly, not from sound, but from habit carved over years of living where trouble rode without warning. The air was colder than the night before, a bite in it that didn't match the season. He sat up, reached for the revolver by the bed, and listened. Ayana was already awake. She sat on the edge of the cot, blanket pushed aside, boots on her feet. She hadn't spoken, but her posture said she'd heard the same thing he had. She looked at the door, then at him. No panic, no surprise, just readiness. He stood, holstered the revolver, and moved quietly to the window. The land outside was gray-blue with the first light. He scanned the ridge leading from the canyon trail. 3 dark shapes moved slowly along the rise, not close yet, but closing distance. He recognized the way they rode, straight-backed, silent, not weaving like drunks or scouts pretending not to look. These were warriors, not wanderers. He looked back at Ayana. 3 riders, not army, not the men who brought you. She stood carefully, testing her legs. The fever was gone, strength steadier. She tightened the strip of cloth that cinched his shirt at her waist, then moved to the window and looked without leaning. Her breathing changed, deeper but controlled. She didn't blink when she said it. "My people." She studied their distance. "You sure?" She nodded once. "Raven marking on horsetail. Only Blackwood band ride with bird sign." He hadn't noticed it at that range, but he trusted she knew. The question he'd been expecting, since she spoke her father's name, now settled in full. Would they take her, or cut him down first for touching what belonged to their blood? He stepped back from the window. "You stay inside until I speak to them." She turned to him sharply. "If they see only you, they think you hide me or use me. I stand by door, but not behind you." He weighed that. She was right. If they thought he'd kept her chained or claimed, they wouldn't ask twice. "Then you speak first," he said. "Name your father. Make them see you're not a prisoner." She didn't waste time agreeing. She just moved toward the door and waited. Wade stepped onto the porch, rifle in his hand, but lowered, not aimed. He didn't shout. He stood where they could see him clearly. The 3 riders slowed when they spotted him. As they came closer, the horse in front revealed the marking Ayana mentioned. 3 slashes carved into a small piece of bone braided into the tail. The lead rider was older, lines at the corners of his eyes, hair braided with small beads and feathers. The other 2 were younger, one with a scar near his temple, both carrying bows and rifles across their backs. They stopped 30 yards from the cabin, watching him with hard, unreadable faces. None reached for weapons, but none relaxed either. Wade didn't move. He spoke in a flat, steady tone. "She's alive. She's inside. She wasn't taken by me." Before they could answer, Ayana stepped into view in the doorway. She didn't walk toward them, but stood where they could see her fully. The younger riders stiffened, shock showing in their posture, even if it didn't show on their faces. The older one's eyes narrowed, relief and fury both buried in his expression. Ayana raised her chin slightly. "I'm not bound. I stand by my will." The older man spoke in Apache first, voice low and intense. She answered in the same tongue, short phrases, controlled tone. Wade didn't know the words, but he could hear accusation in the man's voice, dispute in hers. Then she switched to English, likely so Wade could follow. "He cut rope. He gave food. No soldier touched me since." One of the younger riders glared at Wade like that wasn't enough to wipe suspicion clean. The older one dismounted slowly, eyes fixed on Wade. He spoke with careful English. "You trade horse for her." Wade shook his head once. "They left her tied. I let them take the horse to avoid blood in my yard. I didn't buy her. I didn't hold her." The man's jaw moved, processing. He looked at Ayana again. "You hurt?" She answered in Apache. He nodded once, shifting back to Wade. "Why you help?" Wade didn't dress it up. "She would have died if I didn't. I've buried enough people near this land." It wasn't meant to convince them, but it landed. The man studied his face along a moment, then spoke to Ayana again. Her reply was shorter this time, calmer. The older rider looked at Wade once more. She daughter of Tania. Wade already knew, but he didn't react. Then it's right you came for her. Ayana stepped forward, one pace. I not leave yet, she said to her tribesmen. That caught all three off guard. The younger ones frowned. The older man spoke sharply in Apache, demanding explanation. She answered in a low tone, glancing briefly at Wade but not stepping behind him. Wade stayed silent. He wouldn't interfere in that decision. After a tense exchange, the older man finally nodded once, though reluctance showed in the stiffness of his shoulders. He turned to Wade. She not prisoner. You speak truth, but men who take her, where they go? Wade gave the direction of Broken Mesa in the trading post. 3 of them, scar over eyebrow, 1 in cavalry coat, 1 calls himself. The older rider memorized the details with his eyes. He spoke to the younger men in Apache, then mounted again. They would hunt now, and whatever debt they believed Wade held might rest on how that ended. Before they turned to leave, Ayana said one last thing in her language. The older man looked at her, then at Wade again. He gave one curt nod toward the cabin, not friendly, but not a threat. Then the 3 riders turned their horses and disappeared the way they'd come, silent as they appeared. When they were gone, Ayana let out a breath she hadn't shown she'd been holding. Wade lowered his rifle but didn't set it down yet. She looked at him, not fearful, not shaken, just certain of what her people understood. Now they come back soon, she said, but not to kill you. He didn't ask if she planned to leave with them next time. He only asked, you trust that? She held his gaze. I stand with you. They see that. They know I choose, not forced. The question neither of them voiced yet, what that choice meant tomorrow, hung in the quiet as the sun climbed higher over the ridge. The Apache riders didn't return that day, but their presence changed the air around the cabin. Wade checked the rifle only once after they left, then leaned it back in its usual place. Ayana stayed near the doorway for a while, not out of fear, but because she was thinking through what might come next. She sat at the table and ate the beans he reheated without needing to be asked twice. Her strength had returned enough that her hands were steady, and the bruises on her wrists were dark but no longer raw. The cuts on her feet were healing under the bandages. She didn't limp anymore unless she stepped wrong. Wade sat across from her. Neither spoke until she finished, but the silence wasn't strained. It was the same kind that had settled since the first night. Quiet that said more than words without forcing anything. When she set the tin plate aside, she looked directly at him. They not take me unless I ask. He nodded once. I figured that from the way you spoke to them. She studied his face for a long second. You think I leave now? That's for you to decide, he said. You're not tied to this place, but if you walk out, I won't stop you or follow you. She seemed to weigh his words carefully. You say you not run if they come. You stand if danger. That true? I don't break what I say, he replied. She accepted that. Then she said something he hadn't expected. They know you not harm me. They tell my father. He send word when he hear I live. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on hers, waiting for the part she wasn't saying. When she finally spoke again, her voice was even. If I go back to camp, they ask me to stay with them. They say I must return to Women's Lodge, but I not same now. He understood what she meant. Whatever happened before she arrived here had changed what waiting among her own people would feel like. She wouldn't be seen the same way. You could stay here until you're sure, he said, not as a prisoner, just until you know what you want. She leaned back slightly, thinking. If soldiers come first, I'll speak before rifles lift, he said. And if those men who took you come back, they won't leave upright. She seemed satisfied with that, but still looked at him carefully. If my father comes himself, he asks you why you keep me. Then I'll tell him the truth, Wade said. I didn't keep you, you stayed. Her expression didn't soften, but something in her eyes settled. She stood slowly and stepped toward the door. He followed her out onto the porch. The land stretched in every direction, the ridge casting a long shadow across the flats. Tracks from the Apache riders still marked the dirt where the sun hadn't baked them out yet. She looked at them, then past them, then back at Wade. They come back when they find the men, she said. They bring proof. You think they'll kill those men? Wade asked. She didn't hesitate. If they find them before the soldiers do? Yes. He didn't argue with that. Justice wasn't the same in every land. She stepped off the porch and walked a short distance toward the dry trough and back. Her movements were steady now, no stagger in her step. When she stopped near him again, she said, I stay until I see my father or word from my people. If they tell me go, I still choose. He didn't hide the question in his voice. Choose what? She looked him straight in the eyes. To stay or leave, not be taken either, boom. He held her gaze. Then this place is yours, same as mine, until that choice comes. She didn't thank him, didn't smile. She just nodded once and went back inside. As the afternoon passed, Wade repaired a hinge on the door and brought in more water. Ayanna cleaned the cot, folded the blanket, and put away what little she'd been using, as if claiming space instead of borrowing it. When he asked nothing about it, she glanced at him once, checking if he'd object. He didn't. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. She laid her blanket on the floor near the wall opposite his bed, closer than before, but not beside him. He didn't comment or ask why. Before she lay down, she said only one thing more. When my people come again, I speak first. They hear me. He answered, and I'll be here when they do. The final light faded behind the ridge. Outside, the wind was low and carried no hoofbeats, no threat. Inside, two people who had met by force and accident now shared a space, not out of fear, but out of decision. Nothing hung unfinished. No one waited to claim her. No one waited to drive him off. Whatever came next, Apache kin, soldiers, or silence, it would meet them on ground neither stood on alone. The story of Wade Carrick and Ayanna, the chief's daughter mistaken for a slave, delivers a powerful lesson about the courage to defy assumptions and the strength found in choosing compassion over isolation. Wade, a solitary cowboy scarred by loss, could have turned away from Ayanna, tied and broken, to avoid the trouble her presence promised. Instead, he cut her ropes, offered shelter, and stood by her, even when her identity as Tenia's daughter brought the threat of her tribe's wrath. His actions teach us that true honor lies in protecting someone's dignity, even when it risks our own safety. Ayanna's refusal to be defined by her captor's cruelty and her choice to stay until she could decide her own path shows the resilience of a spirit unbroken by hardship. Their bond, forged through mutual respect, reminds us that trust can grow in the harshest circumstances when we meet others with honesty. This tale stirs deep emotions, urging us to reflect on moments when we can stand for someone society dismisses, offering them not just survival, but a chance to reclaim their voice. It challenges us to open our doors, not just our hearts, to those in need, trusting that shared strength can redefine what home means. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What does this story inspire in you? Have you ever stood up for someone against the odds? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join our community for more stories that ignite the soul and remind us of the power of human connection. Your support keeps these timeless tales alive.